how does the code?
Great question. If this concept of lynching first, whether you're Israeli or Palestinian, Baptist or Chinese, Democrat or Republican, those people agree on the state of freedom of thought. Hundreds of millions of dollars is managed without violence, okay, across widely varying economies, right? And that is effective for getting literally consensus, all consensus, for consensus with the work. And when people can get consensus, they're getting consensus on their basic rights that determine for something. This is exactly how people would fight for, for hundreds of millions of dollars, people will really care about that. For hundreds of millions of dollars, people get consensus and truth on this. It's highly adversarial, right? So the first generalization that says we can go from fights that reflect Bitcoin sometimes to fights that reflect other kinds of assets. That's the entire DeFi space. Basically, the price you can go from consensus on what byte, you can go to consensus on n bytes, the cost of consensus, right? Well, it's digital represented, or everything digital represented as bytes. So now you can get consensus on certain kinds of digital information, Bitcoin, but then also financial. The next generalization is what are called ledger rights. Many FedEx can be partially or completely function. It's not just people who are there's things like people looking this, that. All these will they talk about extensively. Law philosophy resolve seeing that some actor has enough of a bank balance to accommodate what they say they want. You can imagine many kinds of digital assertions can be turned into crypto security problems. So those are now have a library partially. Okay. This is how you get consensus, as opposed to having a white Western Wikipedia editor or a white Western US media corporation or a government simply saying the truth.
So, do you think truth is such an easy thing to get to higher questions of politics? Is the problem that the consensus like is being active problem that out? Was the point for the election rigged or not? Is the earth flat or not? That's a scientific one. That's a scientific disclosure. But even the earth, like that was an example from that example, but it's very rigorous to show the earth is not flat. But there's some social phenomenon, political phenomenon, philosophical that will have a lot of debate, historical stuff about different forces operating in the atmosphere, Stalinist, and you could probably all those, yeah, the story of debate about a lot of stuff as well. Drugs. Yeah, they offer a lot of debate about how good it is that on the actual behavioral decisions with Hitler and so on. So there's still a lot of debate. Is it so easy to fix with decentralization?
So I actually have those two chapters that is called essentially this topic. And so it's like 70 pages or something like that. So let me try to summarize. First is that there was an article that came out. I can't find it. It was about historians in the year 3000 about clearly Queen Britain was a very powerful weakness. Girls around the world worship her like the god. And look, it's very funny because the walls of the current society by human civilization thousands years ago, having no context of it, right? And it's a very thought-provoking article. It says sometimes there's some discovery that rewrites the whole thing. Do you know what, like, Göbekli Tepe is?
Everything I know about that is from Rogan. This is a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debates there.
There's a lot of debate. But basically, like, discovery of the site in Turkey that totally shifts our history. Like, when civilization was found, pushing it back thousands of years, but, past, it's like an English problem in business. Like, we're trying to reconstruct this from the information, right? It's like X-ray crystallography, it's an English problem. Right? Plato's cave, we're trying to reconstruct what the world looks like outside, shadows, experiments that have been given to us, or that we found. And so in that sense, as you find more information, there must be past changes, right? Oh, wow, okay, that was civilization, that discovery change.
The organs, right? Given all the gaps in the data cap, like process of the process of trying to fill the gap.
Well, so here's the thing. I think we're very close. That's why it'll sound crazy, but our descendants, I really do think of what the blockchain is, cryptographic, verifiable history, as the next step. Like on, because anybody who has the record can change. Math is constant across human time, right? So the value of pi is constant. That's one of the few constants across all civilizations. Right? So maybe in the future, assuming of course the digital record is actually intact, so that because the area of the persistent practice around data and floppy documents and stuff like that. That's in some ways digitally persistent, in some ways physically persistent. Assuming we can figure out how to operate somehow, then this future record at least is internally consistent. Right? You can run a bunch of equivalence and checksums, right? The Bitcoin verification process. Just sum them all up and see that okay, it's FG and these are maps. And boom, that at least is internally consistent. Okay. Again, it doesn't say all the people who have worked in it were if you could put something on at least the metadata is like very possible. And this is a new tool. It's a really new tool in terms of a robust history that is expensive and technically challenging to edit and alter. And that is the alternative to the Stalin-esque rewriting history of centralized power.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a lot of thinking about. I'm actually, as you're talking, I'm also thinking about the fact that I think 99% of my access to data is because I basically use it very similar to stack.
And even there, it doesn't have unit tests. For example, one thing, right? So one thing I remember, again, I may be wrong with this, I recall that Kelly criterion is it's actually quite a usage of notes, like how the option decides your bets. Okay, and you can have given your kind of probability that the investment pays off or so probably, you can have the too large, that's too small. Sometimes the Kelly criterion goes negative actually says you should actually take leverage. You're so sure this is a good outcome that you should actually spend more than your current bankroll because you're going to get. It's a very sophisticated thing. And as you recall, inside has a wrong equation. And I believe that was reprinted of the wrong equation as criterion for a while. Okay? And so without unit tests, see, math is one thing that you could unit test, right? You could literally have the insert on the right hand side today, right? The modern version. You've got Jupyter, you've got Replit, you've got all these things. The modern version is easier. There's sites like golden.com, for example, that there's a bunch of things, lots of stuff across the board on those. And I'm not capitalist, but I'm trying to see if not just talk about the better version. It's hard to build something better, so actually, and where you want this assertions that are actually produced, you don't just have the information there. You have written down code, you can editor, you can download the page, you can rerun it. It's reproducible.
So the problem with that kind of reproducibility is that that friction is hard to get unless you try the job with UX and so on. The thing that I think is interesting about Wikipedia on the technical side is that without the unit tests, without the insertion, it's still also a incredible job. Because the reason it's the people that write those articles, and I've seen this also in Stanford, are the people that care about this most. And there's a pride in getting it right.
Okay, so I'm agreeing with you, right? So absolutely, there's some good there. There's fun. Again, I think we've used a huge step up from what preceded it in some ways on the technical topics. Yes. However, you talk about the editing environment, right? Like the markup, it's very, mid 2000s, right? It is not. Yeah, exactly. At a minimum, for example, it's not visible, right? So, like Medium or something like that, you just go in and type, and it looks exactly like this. Here you to a markup language with editor comments, and hit enter, and something is over in your edit, something like that, and you don't know how it looks on the page. You might have to do a few, so editing. You talk about bearish editing. That's number two is given that it might be read 1,000 times for one type of script, it is important to actually have things tested if they can be, given that we've got modern technology. And that's something that's hard to retrofit into this because it's so possible.
Right. There's the interface on every side. The editor, even just with the editor, just say they want to go right and want to make it so easy, but easier to check their work.
That's
like
right.
debug, like a nice aid with the.
That's exactly right. The editing is. That's right. And the thing about this is, as I said, because the truth is the global constant, but incorrectness. Right. Go ahead. Every happy family.
No, I love to think that truth.
Well, so here's a right. So the thing is that what you can do is, let's say you can have a unit tested page for everything that's on. First of all, it makes the page more useful because you can download, you can run it, you can import it, and so on. Second is it leads into one of the things that we can talk about. I sort of like a roadmap for building alternatives to not just existing companies, but to any existing U.S. institutions, from media and tech companies to courts and government and academia and nonprofits. The Wikipedia discussion actually gets to how you implement academia, right? And so academia right now, problems is kind of related to the institutions trust them, because the answer is to trust no one, right? I think the alternative is decentralized verification. How does that apply to academia? First observation is we are seeing science being abused. Capital S science is Maxwell's equations.
That's good.
That's a good one, right? Quote unquote science is a paper that came out last week. And the key thing is that capital S science, real science, is about independent replication, not prestigious citation. That's the definition. All the journal stuff, the professors, it's just a superstructure that was set on top to make experiments more reproducible. And that superstructure is now dominating the underlying thing because people are just fixated on the prestige, the citation, and not the replication, right? So how does that apply here? Once you start thinking about how many replications does this thing have, Maxwell equation, there's trillions of replications. Every time us speaking into this right now, we're testing, our theory of electromagnetic field, right? Or electromagnetic fields. Every single time you pick up the cell phone or use computer, you're putting our numbers to the test, right? Whereas some paper that came out of the science feature, we have 0 replications. Yet it is being cited as prestigious scientists from Stanford and Harvard and MIT all came up with X, right? And so the prestige is a substitute for the actual replication. So there's a concept called Goodhart's law. Okay, I'm just going to quote it. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Okay, so for example, backlinks on the web were a good signal to use when people didn't know they were using the signal.
You talk about quantity versus quality. PageRank was a pretty good approximation for quality.
Yes,
but fascinating.
It's a fascinating thing to talk about that. But basically, once people know that you're using this as a measure, they will start to game it. And so then you have this cycle where sometimes you have to Satoshi with work was miraculously able to come to the game, where the gaming of it was difficult to absolutely compute, right? So it's a rare kind of game where knowledge of the game is a lot of people game.
Yeah, but really.
actually on meta point. Gosh, there's a game where the rule of the game is to change the rules. Okay. Yeah. But gosh, it's almost something. Gnomic. Okay.
And all have ice.
And Gnomic is where the board game is used. At first, that seems insane. Then you realize that's Congress.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So because there are laws for elections that elect the editors of those laws, who then change the laws that get elected to your name. Right? That's bad for you. That is the other way of thinking about it is what every software engineer is doing. You are constantly changing rules by adding software and code updates and things. Right? So, many games devolve into metagames, right? So, right? How essentially games develop. Proof of work is so amazing because it didn't devolve into right? It became very powerful with that set up, very powerful. Does that say it will always be like that? But it's very powerful.
Would you think this contagion that I'd love to ask about something you guys know about?
It's all actually related.
I mean,
Yeah, Wikipedia, media, and academia are all related to the question of independent replication versus like
sure. So that the problem with authority and prestige, as you see it, academia and media and media editors, they have to have a mechanism where the data and the reproducibility is the dominant.
that's right. And so one way to think about this is like I said that Western civilization actually has a break glass deployment. It's called decentralism. Right? Martin Luther had with the Catholic Church two ossified decentralism, decentralized from Protestant and okay, he said, at the time people were able to pay for say they could sin. They could say, okay, I sinned 5 times yesterday. Here's the equivalent of $50. Okay, that's and just go buy it way out. And people debate as to how frequent those indulgences pieces. So decentralization will break away from the ossified church, start something new, right? And in theory, the wars of the were about things like, or the wafer was the body of Christ or what have you. But in part, they were also about power and whether the centralized entity would write off rules or the decentralized one would. And so what happened was obviously Catholicism existed. Okay? And similarly, here you've got this ossified institution where forget about. I mean, there's complicated studies that do sometimes, but you have science saying masks will work when they do. Okay, everybody says, and it's not like everybody knew that there's not like some massive studies that came out and changed our perspective on mask wearing to something that was just consistently served as this science says. And then you got media acknowledgement, science said something different. The next day, right? I remember this thing. I think we just got mask and then it has a precaution, and then later, post vaccination, that's like actually about it. But the point was that such levels of uncertainty about instead, people, were basically lying in science and public policy was, the public health was political. Okay? So something like that, you're spending their own curriculum basically nothing. And so in such a circumstance, what do you do? Break glass, decentralized. What does that look like? Okay. So let me describe what I call crypto science. By analogy to crypto, just like fiat science, crypto science, right? Fiat economics. Okay. So in any experiment, any paper when it comes out, it's you can sort of divide it into the analog to digital and purely digital. Because the analog is you're running some instruments, you're getting some data, okay? And then once you've got the data, you're generating tables and text and PDF from that data, right? We decided the data collection step, and I'll come back to that. Right? Just the purely visual one. What does the ideal academic paper look like in 2022? First, concept called reproducible reproducible research is the idea that PDF should be regenerated from the data and code. Okay, so you build an entry regenerate. Why is this really important as a concept? John Clare Booth and Don Alexander years ago, I put these stats because the text alone often doesn't describe every parameter or something, right? Which is code and easy. Without that, it's hard. Okay, so reproducible means you generate the data from the code and the data you had entry. Okay, now one issue is that many papers out there in science, nature, subjects are not. What were some of the papers? The open access movement has been fighting this for the last 27 years at various levels of this like open access. Okay, so the first step is the code, the data, and the PDF go on chain. Step number one. Okay. The second thing is once you've got, so if anybody is, and actually if you're a chain, it could be something. It could be something where there's just the URL is on the chain and stored on top of many different things. But let's call that on-chain problem. Not just online on-chain. When it's on-chain, anybody can get it. So that's one. Second is once you've got something where you can generate the code, or the PDF of the code with the end, guess what? You can have citations between two papers turn into imports. That's cool. So now you're not just getting composable finance like DeFi, where you have an interest rate calculator and another. You have composable science. And now you can say this paper, this, especially in ML, right? You'll often cite a previous paper and extension, for example, right? You're gonna want to scatter plot sometimes your paper, your algorithm versus theirs. That is facilitated if their entire paper is reproducible research that is generated. You can just really import that Python, and then you can generate your figure off, right? Moreover, think about how that aids reproducibility, because you don't have to reproduce in a literal sense every single code that you did. You'll use their code. Okay, people start compounding on better sense. Okay, now I talked about this. Actually, there's a few folks who have been actually building this. So there's usescholar.org, which actually has a demo of this, like just a V1 like kind of prototype that shows two stats papers on chain, and one side together with imports. There's also a thing like called I think dsci.com, which is from Unix, science. So this itself changes how we think about papers. And actually, by the way, the inspiration for PageRank was actually citations, like the impact factor out of that. That's where Byron Page Dr. Hunt's about, right? So now you've got a web of citations that report statements on chain. In theory, you could track back to its entities. Okay, so if it's citing something, you can now look it up and look it up. And a surprising number of papers actually, their antecedents don't have any, but the original source says something different, which I've got called telephone game, and like the spinach, like a iron or something like that. I forget the details of the story, but it's something where you track back the citation, get more contradicting each other. Okay, but it's just something that just gets copy pasted, and it's a fact. It's not actually a fact. This allows you to cheaply or something like that. Okay. Now, what I'm describing is a big problem, but it's a finite problem. It's essentially taking all the important papers and putting them on chains about the scale of, let's say, okay. So it's like, I don't know, a few 100,000, a few million papers. I don't know the exact number. It'll be at that number. So now you've got number one, these things that are still on chain. Okay. Number two, you turn citations into statements. Number three, anybody can now, at a minimum, download that code. And while they may not have the instruments, I'll come back to that. So they have the instruments, they can do internal checks. The benefit law stuff we're just talking about. You can internally check things to see if it's on the graph. And often you'll find where things that don't have that result there, right? And now you made it so that anybody in Brazil, India, Nigeria, they may not have library access, but they can. Now, how do you fund all this? Well, good thing is crypto actually will as well. And you're here start doing things like to fund the funding aspect of things like does generate money. And so you can probably imagine various tools, whether it's tokens or NFTs or something like that. Finally, what this does is it is not, right? It is not saying don't trust anybody. Neither is it just trust centralized active establishments. Instead, it's saying trust because you can verify, because we can download things. The crucial thing that I'm assuming is billions of supercomputers around the world. We have all MacBooks and iPhones that can crank lots of computation. So everything's digital. We can't verify those. Okay. Now, there's one last step, which is I mentioned the instruments, right? Whether it's your sequencing machine or your accelerometer or something like that is generating the data that you are reporting in your paper when you put it on. Okay. Basically, you think of it as analog to digital interface. We can cryptograph that too. For example, within a sequencing machine has an experiment manifest, and when that's written to this website called NCPI, National Center for Biotechnology Information. You can see the experiment editing on very sequencing points. It'll tell you that students and time it from what that does is allows you to correct some batch effects. Sometimes with the sequence on this day, the next day, that makes it look like there's a significant difference between the results, but it's just actually batch effects. Okay. The point is, if you have a crypto instrument, you can have various hashes and stuff of data, and the sheer custody of the data itself that are streamed by very much that the manufacturer can program it. For anything that's really, you might say, well, that's okay, right? Saying actually not. You know why? If you're doing a study whose results are going to be used to influence policy, it's going to control lives of people. Every single step has to be focused with last thoughts on. You need to be able to go back to the raw data. You need to be able to interrogate that. And again, this is anybody who's a good scientist will embrace this.
Right. So, first of all, that was a really nice position in the future of science. The pushback I would provide to that with the is like what you described is so much better than what we currently have. That I think a lot of people would say any of the stuff that suggest that they can. So even if you're sharing the code,
Yes.
or sharing the data, how often targeted, like the actual data or a large number of the parameters, not share the parameters that will involve with ready to experiment a whole bunch of machines involved, except maybe at a high level version. The data from the experiment from large-scale mentioning. Right. So there's several ways to fix this, and one of them I you described something says, hey, exactly. So first of all, there should be, even if it's not perfectly unchanged, where you can automatically import all of you just even the act of sharing the code, sharing the data, maybe in a way that's not into a larger structure, is already a very big positive step. Yes, saying like if you don't do this, then this doesn't count. And because in general, I think my worry, I somebody who's a programmer, I love the picture paint. Just import everything, all checks everything. My problem is that makes incremental science easier and revolutionary science harder. Oh, actually, very much. I would love to hear about it. You guys, let me just kind of elaborate. Sure. Why? Sometimes you have to think in this gray area of fuzziness, then you're thinking a totally novel idea. And when you have to concretize data, like some of the greatest things that are right now data, they're in the space of ideas almost. Like you're kind of sketching stuff in with pairs, but like Einstein himself is famous by papers, and they're really strong, but they're fuzzy. They're a little bit fuzzy, and so I think GAN paper, you're often thinking of like new data sets, new ideas, and I think maybe as a step after paper is written, you could probably copyright it, integrate it into the rest, etc. Like you shouldn't feel that pressure, I guess. Right?
Well, I mean, there's different each of the steps that I talked about. Right? There's like data being public, just having the paper being public, that's like right. Then you have the thing being generated from code data, like a PDF. Then you have the citations. Then you have the full citation graph, as in which you just follow it up back, right? And now you have that. Then you have the off-chain, the analog digital crypto custody, right? Like you're hashing things, so you have chain custody. Each of those is kind of like a level up and adds to the complexity, but it also adds the auditability to verify version. But one thing I'd say I wanted to respond to that you said was that you think this would be good for incremental design. Actually, quite the opposite. I think academia is institutional. It's not. For example, NIH has this graph, which is like I think it's age of recipients of R01 grants. Okay, and what it shows is basically it's like a hump that moves over time, roughly plus 1 year forward for the average age as the year moves on. Okay, I'll see if I can find the GIF. Why is this? Let me see if I can find it. It's ridiculously powerful. It's essentially what's that?
There was a video with this eight distribution of NIH, and it starts out with like age of distribution, percent PIs, and 19 early 1980s years time, and slowly from what I just said, well, year per year.
And this is 10 years ago.
1 year, per year.
And notice how, first of all, average age is way up where you become age. Second is, it's a cohort of guys, people, who are just awarding grants to each other. It's clearly what happened. That's unlike I am. We're not awarding grants to folks much younger, okay? Because folks have to do it. Right? So this is what happens when you get prestigious citation application. The age is creeping up. And this was 10 years ago on South University, more geographic, high tech, right? And so the structures that of our first numbers and the entire person for science now. One thing I'll also advise people to say, the government has rankings, the internet, and self-driving car, and space flight, and so on. How can you possibly be against the U.S. government? Kneel and repent for its bounty, and do it for bigger reasons because they're quite that way. That's really thing because they've replaced GOD. They really think of the U.S. government as the conservative U.S. government is like all powerful security fraud, and the progressive is going to deny all powerful, like nurturing kind of all. Okay, but in this context, they're like, how can we do this? Some tech bro possibly you could ever do basic science without the funding of the U.S. government? Has it not all these systems, right? And the edge of this is actually saying, well, what did the government do? Science happen? Did you go? I think it did. Really, actually, they funded by NASA. No, they weren't, right? With aviation and rail, those gigantic, that arose and both were stimulated by and stimulated development of pure science. They need to be funded by NSF, right? Therefore, NSF is not a necessary good science. That is the United States, obviously, a lot of these firms. I have believe it's called the American stuff like that. Actually, less. Okay, so I accept something, right? So it's like in the sense. So Dune was before the American Revolution, right? Obviously, that meant huge innovations would happen before the U.S. government or NIH before it, right? Which means they are not a necessary condition of it. That itself is crucial because a lot of people say the government is necessary for business. It is not necessary. It is one possible catalyst. And I would argue that mid-century it was okay because mid-century was the time when the centralized 1933, 1945, 1969, River Dam, favored centralization going into 1950 and started to become centralization. I've talked about this in the book. Some individuals talk about this, but very roughly, you go up into 1950 and have mass media and mass production, and centralization all have giant agencies like capitalistic. You go out of 1950 and you get GPUs and personal computers and internet mobile phones and currency. You have the decentralization. And so this entire centralized scientific establishment was set up at the peak of the centralized century. And it might be the right thing to do at that time, but it's now showing its age. And it's no longer actually here to have. Where the human patients going to have this was not, to our knowledge, a professor, right? That's this revolutionary thing that came outside of it. Early in the pandemic, there's something called project-evidence.github.io, which came up with all of the evidence for the coronavirus possibly having been a lab. But that was a very controversial thing to discuss, right? Alina Chan, to her credit, Matt really Chan in this book, whether the coronavirus was a lab leak or not. I think it's plausible that it was. I can't say I'm 100% sure, but this is worthy of discussion. Okay? Of course, discussion. Point being that the pseudonymous online publication of project-evidence.github.io happened when it was taboo news. So we're back to the age of pseudonymous publication, where only the arguments can argue with the person can be attacked. Okay, this is actually something that used to happen in the past, like it's a famous story where Newton solved the problem. Said, "I dug the lion by his claw," or something like that, right? People used to do pseudonymous publication in the past so that they could get part by their scientific ideas and not person themselves, right? And so, I do disagree with that. This is the incremental stuff. This is actually the biggest incremental stuff. Is an institutional gerontocracy that academia, where it's like,
Yeah, I don't. I think I agree with it. I'm not going to get stuck on technicalities because I think I was referring to your data sets including code, and so that forces just knowing how code works, forces structure, and structure usually favors the process. Like if you fork code, not going to it decentralizes revolution. You want to go from scratch.
Okay, so I understand your point. And I also agree that some people, there's like Francis Drake on the cloud stream, where there's more theoretical, they're more about like where to do the data itself, and so on, right? So I agree with that. Still, I don't. The counter argument is rather than 1,000 people try to rebuild the whole thing and do it with errors, but they can just import. They can more easily build upon what others have done, right?
Oh yeah. And so the paper should be forkable.
Well, yeah. So you're right. Like FNS counts with batteries and standard, right? Because the relationship is important and just get to work, right? That means you can fly. Whereas if you couldn't do all those things, then you had to rewrite your handling, you had to go through incremental things. Libraries actually allow for rewriting. That's my kind of
I think you agree. I think that paints a picture. I hope that's a picture that science. It certainly does. It fits with code very well. I just wonder how much of science can be that, which is you report how much of it is possible to do that. Certainly from the things I work on, yeah, which is machine learning world, all the science. That for, all right, you can think of biology. Yes, so, Mr. Drew, I think so. And then there's computer stuff like psychology. Some people don't decide. No, just love all the things. I think as you get farther and farther away from the hard technical field, it does get tougher and tougher and tougher to have like importable code.
Okay, so let me give strong point, right? So there's a guy, I think he's a pretty machine learning guy, creator of actually Eros. He just recently translation.
Yeah, he's been on stock yesterday.
Okay, great. So he just
I disagree with him.
Yes, me too. years, nearly every branch of science will be, for all intents and purposes, a branch of computer science. Computational physics, computational chemistry, computational biology, computational medicine, computational archaeology, linguistics, solutions, big data analysis, and ML. That to me is incredibly obvious. First of all we're doing every day is PDFs and data analysis on a computer, right? And so every single one of those numbers can be reduced to, yeah, I love digital stuff, then it's all digital. Then you're flying.
You put a date these days, how long?
For 10 years. Yeah. I argue it's already, right? And here's the thing. You were saying, well, you might drop off in psychology. Actually, I think it's the softer sciences that are going to hard line. One of the things I talk about a lot in the book is, for example, history, the concept of crypto history makes history really good. One way of thinking about it is, remember my Britney Spears example, right? Where we right? Okay, so at first it's kind of a funny thing to say, computer scientists term for history is law science. Until I realized that, what would a future historian, how would they write about the content? Well, a huge part of that history occurred on the servers of Twitter and Facebook. So now you go from like a log file, which is the individual record of the server action, to a decade worth of data on literally billions of people. All like arguably that's why I say that's like actually what history was. It makes sense was this giant digital history. As the 2030s, more of that is going to move from online to on-chain and then graphically verified. So that soft subject of history becomes something that you can calculate with trends and engrams and stuff like that.
Yes. And I would say that Donald Trump was racist when he was working on Twitter. Yeah. And many social platforms and all his tweets were gone.
Yeah, someone who has an archive of it, but yeah, I understand.
Yeah. Well, the flood of data about individual increases censorship, it becomes much more difficult to actually have an archive and stuff. But yes, for important people like us, I believe that. Yes. Maybe on that topic, ask you about Trump. You were considered for a position of a commissioner in the Trump administration. And I think in terms of the network state, in terms of the digital world, one of the seminal acts in history of that was the banning of Trump. Yeah.
Sure. So first, let me help you talk with the FDA. So, but I do believe that this is a whole topic. I do believe that just as it was easier to create Bitcoin than to form the Fed, right? Forming the Fed basically still has now, right? So just as it was easier to create Bitcoin than to form the Fed, it will literally be easier to start a new country than to form the FDA. It may take 10 or 20 years. I think that Bitcoin is only about years old, right? It may take with different biological policies. But that is now we get out perhaps the single worst thing in the world, which is harmonization, regulatory harmonization. Regulatory harmonization is the mechanism by which U.S. regulators impose their regulations on the entire world. So they basically have a monopoly like this regulation. This is not just the FDA, it's SEC, and FAA, and so on and so forth. And for the same reason that a small company will use Facebook login, they will outsource their login to Facebook. A small country will outsource their regulation. Okay, with all the intent because, I mean, you know the names of some politicians. Can you name some regulators? Right? Yeah, they will brag on the website that they regulate and get exactly the same, like 25 cents out of every dollar, something like this. Okay, it's like double digits. Okay, that's a pretty big deal. And the thing about this is, people will talk about quote our democracies, but many of the positions in quote our democracy are actually not subject to democratic accountability. You have tenured professors, and you have tax exempt colleges. You have the Salzburg New York Times who have dual class stock. You have, a bunch of positions that are out of the reach of the record, and that includes regulators who have career tenure after just a few years of not just the service. So not accountable for the small startups and we have a small country, a lot of the small innovation, right? There are cracks in this thing, right? The FDA did not equip itself well during the pandemic. For example, that there's so many issues. But one of the things that even actually New York Times reported, the reason that people thought that no COVID cases in the U.S. during the pandemic was that the FDA was denying people the ability to run COVID tests. And the emergency use authorization was the emergency situation like right now, right? But it was not, it was just taking forever. And so some labs did civil disobedience and they just disobeyed the FDA and just went and tested academic labs with federal penalties because that's what they are. They're like the police. And they were sort of retroactively granted because NYT ran a positive story. So NYT's authority is usually greater than that of FDA. If they come into a conflict, NYT can expose them. FDA kind of gets spanked, right? And it's not, probably neither party would probably think of themselves that way. But if you look at it, when NYT goes and runs stories on a company, it is all the exact and they get all hit. When it runs stories on a regulator, it just treats regulator usually as if it's just another abstract. It's Zuckerberg's Facebook. You can't name, Google. Yeah, interesting, right? Very important point. Like that person is like named and their face is like just as an example, Zuckerberg's face and name. Most people don't know how much he sells for recognize, right? And he's a guy who's the parent of that is unaccountable. It's not that they get great numbers, no coverage. You don't even think about it, right? And so it's still
There's some aspect why Fauci is very interesting. In my recent memory, there's not been many instances of scientific policy, science policy.
Yeah.
He became against that. As there's so there's media, it's science, people represent science, but it yeah, the positive aspect of that is that there is accountability.
Right, but you can also see the Fauci example shows why this is not want to be public because they enter a political, media mindful. And actually, I like that aspect of it. What I'm not subject to is the concept that in 2022, that the unelected, unfireable, anonymous American regulator should be able to impose regulatory policy. You're not the world of things. It is not something where these other countries are even consciously consenting to that. Just as you can, there's a concept called challenge trials. Okay, the Moderna vaccine was available very, very quickly to synthesize it from the sequence. And challenge trials that people, healthy volunteers, okay, they could have been soldiers, for example, in the varying ages, who are there to take a risk with their lives for their country. Okay, it could have been just healthy volunteers, not necessarily just patriots of whatever kind, in any country, not just a country. But those healthy volunteers could have gone, and at the roses of the pandemic, we didn't know exactly how it was going to be. A 30-year-old, 40-somethings in China were dying from this. Yeah, and it may be, if I hear that, those who were the most susceptible to the virus died fastest because if you can imagine a model where those who were exposed and had the most susceptible also the highest severity and died in greater numbers. If you look at the graph, like deaths from COVID were exponential going into about April 2020 and then leveled off to about 7,500, 10,000 a day, and then kind of fell, right? But it could have gone to 75,000. So we didn't know how serious. This would be a real risk that these people would be taking. But here's what they've done. Basically, in a challenge trial, somebody would have been given the vaccine and then exposed to the virus and then put under observation. And then that would have given you all the data because ultimately the stuff that's something. I mean, yes, synthesis and manufacturing. But the information of whether it worked or not was safe and effective. Like that could be gathered expeditiously with the volunteers for challenge. If you go to a large number of volunteers, absolutely supports the concern of taking on volunteers. Well, so I put it like this. We could have had vaccines early enough to save the lives of like a million Americans, especially soldiers and particularly first responders, others. I could agree with folks who would have stepped up to take that risk.
Heroes walk the walk.
Yeah, that's right. Like if military service is something which is a spiritualized thing, something like that could just shorten the time from pandemic to functional vaccine, right? To days, if you actually look at it. The fact that that didn't happen, and that the Chinese lockdown, that actually, at the beginning, people thought the state could, potentially stop the virus, stop people in place. It turned out to be one of the cases that basically no NPI, no non-partisan intervention really turned out to work that way. Right? And actually, at the very beginning of the pandemic, I said something like, look, this is actually February 3rd, about a month before people, I was watching in China. I saw people doing digital quarantine, using WeChat codes to block people off and so on. I didn't know what was going to happen. I said, look, if the coronavirus goes pandemic, and it seems it may, the extreme edge comes in. Everything you have in surveillance, platform, and centralization is accelerated. Pandemic means emergency powers from the state, even more than terrorism or crime. And sometimes this solution creates the next problem. We're forecasting the future, the coronavirus results in quarantines, nationalism, and centralization. And this may actually work to stop the spread, but once under control, states will not see their powers so decentralized. And I didn't know whether it was going to stop the spread, but I knew that they were trying to do it, right? And, look, it's hard to call every single thing right for find some errors, but in general, I think that was actually pretty good, really effective, right? So it's my point, though. The point is, rather than copying Chinese lockdown, what we should have had were different regimes around the world. To some extent, Sweden defected, from this, right? They had no lockdowns, but really the acts that people were talking about was lockdowns and lockdowns. The real action should be challenge trials versus challenge trials. We've had that in days. Okay? And those are two examples of vaccine. There's so many more.
Those are kind of decentralized innovation that FDA stuff.
FDA can't do it.
Or something like it, right?
Something like that. So this is very, in general, the way I try to think about things is we need one of these as we've talked about, right?
So FDA.
All right. So what was before it, right? So there's both good and bad before, because people don't just have the right model. Okay. So if you ask people what was there before, people will say, FDA itself, it's the, right? Their pronouns are just FDA. Okay. But basically,
Why is that important?
it's just something where
Why is that consumer research?
they have a sort of in-group lingo where when you are kind of talk about themselves, it is kind of it's kind of like in LA people say the one of the right where I said what we talk about or people from the bottom see Canada, right? Just is the actually inside or outside of it, right? In terms of how language, right? And that's that
Is that was part of the silo, the level of the particular dog, but that also means because you're not open to that.
I think it's actually like various aspects of the bar. You know what I'm talking about?
No. Like, good, you can't, just enunciate this is like when we go back as a competing. You can't cite, the mistakes of that.
Okay. So basically, like English start going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I believe it's like the German start with something that you never know, right? I think you're that's good. So that's like
FDA's got the link up.
all right. So so coming back, basically, just talk about FDA and then come back to your question.
What was the year FDA?
Yeah, so
one was
V1 was quote tests. Okay, that's what I'm saying. But V1 was also Advanced Invest. Okay? Advanced Invest, they won the Nobel Prize in the early 1920s. Right? Why? They came with that year for insulin supplementation to treat diabetes. And then they came with the concept, they experimented on dogs, they did self-experimentation, they had healthy volunteers, they experimented with the population as well, right? Because just like you have like a web app and you get command on that, you can have oral or injection or free, so there's different formulations, right? Dosage, all the stuff they just iterate on. Okay, with willing doctor, willing patient. These folks who are affected just out of that. they had won the prize, and he led scale production of the entire company. Okay, so that was the time when pharma moved at the speed of software, when it was will and buyer self. Okay? Because the past demonized as something that our glorious freedom agency is protecting us. Okay, but there's so many ways in which what we're protecting you from is helping. Okay, as you know, I mean, there's a zillion examples of this. I don't know which like all just this podcast, but if you look at a post that I've got, so regulation, disruption, technologies of 2013, or Sarah, okay. This lecture, this goes through like a dozen different examples of crazy things the FDA did, from the kind of stuff that was dramatized in Dallas Fires Club, preventing people from getting AIDS drugs, their various attacks on raw milk, where they were basically saying, here's a quote from FDA filing in 2010. There's no generalized right to physical health, right to consume each children and their food. There's no fundamental right to freedom of health. They basically feel like they own you. You're not allowed to make your decisions about food. There's no generalized right to physical health. Direct quote there, like rhythm. The general frame is usually that FDA says it's protecting you from big bad companies. But really what it's doing is protecting it's preventing now, with that said, this is where as critical as I am of I also actually recognize that like the Ron Paul type thing at the end of that is actually not practical. Like end of that is fine. What Bigfoot did was much more difficult task of building something better than that. That's really difficult to do because the Fed and the FDA, they're like the hub of the current system. People rely on them for lots of different things. Okay, and you're going to need a better version of them and how you actually do it. So with the Fed, SEC, and the entire banks, and whatnot, crypto has a pretty good set of answers for things. And over time, all of the countries that are not, all the groups that are not the U.S. establishment, the CCP, will find more and more to their life. So that part I think is going. Okay, we can talk about that. What does that look like for finance? First, what's making the FDA? So there actually are a bunch of exits from the FDA already, which is things like right to try laws, okay, CLIA labs, laboratory milk tests, compounding pharmacies, also prescription by doctors, and countries that aren't fully compounded. For example, you Kobe, right before he passed away, went and did stem cell treatments in Germany. Okay, stem cells that being pushed out by the administration by things. So those are different kinds of exits. Right to try, at the state level, you can just try the drug. Okay. CLIA labs and LDTs, that means that's an app where you don't have to go through LDT to get a new device. You just run it in the lab. Okay. Compounding pharmacies, these are under attack. I'm not sure where the current statute is, but pharmacists have self-discretion in how they prepare mixtures of drugs. Off-label prescription by MDs. So MDs have enough weight in the system, they kind of push back on MD, and off-label prescription is the concept of drug that's approved for purpose A, prescribed for purpose B, or C, or D. That might be another whole drug approval process. And then countries not authorized, right? So those are five different the FDA on different directions. So first those exits exist. So for those people who are like, oh my God, we're all going to die, or going to poison us with non-FDA approved things, or whatever, right? Those exits exist. You probably actually use tests or use from those. You don't even realize that you have, right? So you have that. Number two is actually testing for safety. There's safety, efficacy, and safety is actually relatively easy to test for. There's very few drugs that are there's TGN 141, that's great examples, which actually really dangerous to people, right? Those drug tests. surveillance. Know that that's actually something where, in theory, go out on the FDA website, which basically says I have a bad code.
Like there's the
Yeah, so it's like right? And so like volunteer recording and get like a PDF and just like upload right? This is about the
like this stuff of
yeah, 35
all the things right now it's gonna be like 90s to have a interface
yeah,
designed by somebody called Fortran.
right. Here we go. So basically, the 3500. So 3500 acres for volunteer report. When we refer to a bad side effect, there's drug resistance. The point is, FDA already has a terrible drugs. It has a terrible version. What was a good version? Like the fact that everybody expected, look, you have to go and spend how do you support it? Yelp or Uber, Airbnb, Ramp, Tap, Starbucks, right? So just modernizing FDA 3500B and modernizing Phase 4, okay, is a huge thing.
The common is there what incentive mechanism forces the modernization of that kind of thing.
Here's how it works. One
To create actually Yelp.
yeah, here's how that works, right? You go to the box or wherever, and you go to your phone and you scan the barcode, okay? What is this? Instantly see global reports, right? By the way, because your files, your details, that global, right? Information from Brazil or from Germany or the same drug you're taking is useful to you. It's not like a national boundary thing. So the whole nation state law will collect violate narratives of people want to thing just like Amazon Uber. That's like it's a global thing. Companies are aggregate. Okay. So what you want is to see every patient and every doctor on this drug that might be reported to your rare or semi-rare patient. Just that alone would be a valuable site.
Use that site. It's solid that something great that happens.
What you could do, they have
It would have to be a company.
yeah, you could have cities.
So we don't have a world where companies
Well, I've
don't
noticed.
help one with seems like a lot of them.
Right? Basically, this is why you have to think about elements, right? There's essentially a combination of first recognizing that it is actually never going to look like this. It does a lot of bad things. It's something which you need to be able to criticize. And you might be like, well, that's obvious, right? Well, in 2010, for example, there's a book that came out very, very called Reputational Power.
A lot of people don't think this.
Yeah, because they will retaliate against you by saying,
Yeah, and everybody should be the shit that's big.
absolutely. The best analogy is TSA. Okay. Have you thought this? Okay. Do you make any jokes about the TSA?
Usually I want to, but they're a little more fun.
Okay.
Can I tell a story?
Sure.
Which is similar to this. I was big in club we got kicked out. For the first time in my life, we're making a joke about, and because I had a camera with me, I left the camera, and I said, okay, cool, like I'll take it off. I made a funny joke that I don't care to tell, but it was just a little offended. He was like, here, I don't care who you're with. And then he proceeded to list the famous people with his TikTok. But there is, I mean, all of those. The reason I made the joke is I sense that there is an entitlement individual, like where the authority is not just my authority. Yeah, right. I almost want to quote that. Right. And I think the poking authority, I would learn a lesson. I have now awarded pride that you have spoken authority, but now I'm kicked out of the club that would have resulted in a fun night with and blown a lot of things, which is not a unique experience. Sure. That I'm sure that basically that you have.
I think that's exactly right. So just like with the TSA, just extending that regime, the current line is the TSA, right? You want to miss your flight, that could cost you comply with absolutely ludicrous regulations like 3-ounce bottles. Well, you know what? You can take a number of 3-ounce bottles and you can combine them into 6-ounce bottles with terrorist technology called mixing. Okay, advanced, right? And the thing about this is everybody in life, actually, it's a very high, let's say, influence and work wherever people apply, right? Millions and millions and millions of people are subject to these absolute moronic regulations. It's all, I think, security data is charged. So millions of people are subject to it. It costs untold billions of dollars. It raises and this other FDA thing, by the way, so FDA TSA team up. Okay. In 2010, the TSA body scanners, they were confronted to us. But when it's government things, yeah, .com is extreme security bad. It's another .gov. Well, we're not trying to make a profit, so we have gone through. Okay. So these body scanners were basically like applied to millions and millions of people, and it's huge kind of confidence. Almost, I think it's quite likely, by the way, that if there's a slight increase in injuries, that the net, morbidity and mortality from those would have outweighed the deaths from terror, right? You can work out the numbers, but when you're just getting them out, if it had any increase in talking about these things, we would have seen certain press, 12 years ago. Point being that despite the cost, despite how many people are exposed to it, despite how obviously it is, you don't make any trouble, nor do you organize protests or about this, because it's something where people with security theater of the moment is part of
But it is fascinating to see that the populace puts up with it. It doesn't. One of my favorite things is to listen to Jordan Peterson. Offline, but I think also on the podcast, it's like people who resist authority, right? And even keep those TSA, how you suppress all these instructions, everything down to, and then whenever you yell at them, they force you to adjust. So that you're all. It's like the TSA makes me smile and joy to my heart. I imagine how can I just walk into it? It really is completely absurd. But and then the whole motivation mechanism becomes distorted by the law. Almost terrorist attacks.
Right. Drugs. Basically, like essentially what they've done, they report one time, right? Search and seizure, they do without probable cause. Everybody's being searched. Everybody's potential terrorist theory. And so what they do, they'll post on the website the guns and drugs whatever they seize in these scans. Of course, if you search everybody, you're gonna find some criminals or whatever. But the cost of doing that is dramatic. Moreover, the fact that people are trained to have, compliance, like so cleaning, right? Where just write your PR, I go along. What's that? This is a really stupid regulation that's existed in plain sight for everybody for 20 years. We're still taking questions. Okay, because it's a shoe bomb or whatever number of years. All of this stuff is there, as opposed to other things you're potentially paradise for reference. But now apply that to FTA. Just like a lot of what TSA does is relevant. A lot of what FDA does is the difference is far fewer people who go through the average. Go to biotech and pharma CEOs. Okay, so you're not understanding what these details are. Number two is the penalty is not $100. Like it is a few $1 million or tens of millions of dollars for getting your company subject to retaliatory. Just like that bouncer, just like the TSA officer, if you make it you can see you got right? So can FDA just silently impede the approval of something, choke you out financially because you're not going one way to get funding, right? So it's wait, I'm guessing another 6 months, data is going to be 6 months, the company doesn't have more time, and if you live, you have to raise around at some time, and now the price is jacked up. That's one thing that we give is process. When you push out timelines from days to get the vaccine approved, the vaccine evaluated rather in trials to months or years. The cost during that time, it just increases on me, right? Because you can't iterate on the product. We all know how long it takes 10 years to launch a product versus 10 days. What's the difference in terms of speed of iteration and cost? Right? So this is part of it. It's not the only thing. There's other things. There's ambience, there's other things. But this one of the things that jacks up prices in the U.S. medical system. Okay. So now you have something where these sequels going through this happening, they can't tell anyone about it because if you read Reputation of Power, okay, I'm going to just quote this amazing book, right? It's written by a guy, being a smart guy, but he's actually simple. He fundamentally thinks. Nevertheless, I spent 12 years doing this because he quotes the CEO of and his patterns. Essentially, what they're describing is like think about like a Vietnam War thing where you've got a POW and you're like blinking in your eyes. Okay, that is the style when you read Carpenter's book. You read the quotes from these CEOs.
Do you recommend the book?
It's a good book. Yeah, it's now a little bit outdated. Okay, because it's like still has a history of the FDA. It's but the reason I think like that is so much more important to people talk about, but they don't talk about it. Right? I just want to read his work. This is 2010. This is the history of powerful regulatory agency how to get and how to use disciplinary power, reputation power, regulation of pharmaceuticals, really how the agency's reputation, our resources, power is also until constraints. Carpenter describes that FDA results make the reputation for cost and the agency while persisting efforts to curb just as traditional. Like this, he has described it as an active. It's not like idea you kind of just past it. It's talking about cultivating reputation, it's power, resisting efforts to curb self-government. Right? The thing is, now you kind of do the flash, you're like, this kind of language and here. The thing is, the kind of person who becomes the CEO of a company, what do they want to expand that company? They want to make more profit. Similarly, the kind of person who comes to run the regulatory agency or one of the sub-units, that person wants to expand its ambit.
Okay, so that was obviously but the CEO of the company, I know that philosophical ideal capitalism is you want to think the problem. We're also human beings. I think there's some fundamental aspects which we want to do a lot of good in the world.
Sure. And the fiduciary will push to get ambitious, the good profit maximizing expansion is selected for. Right? Basically, they believe partially. They're not just, this is important, they're not just something are Grand Theft Auto, make it possible, but they believe in the mission. Okay? They've come to believe in the mission as a person who's like, Chomsky actually has this thing, which is like, I believe that you believe what you believe, but if you didn't believe it, you would be sitting here.
So they select for the kind of people that are able to make a lot of money, and in that process, those people are able to have a constructive narrative that they're doing good, even though they were selected for the fact.
Yeah, and they may actually be doing good, but the thing is, with CEOs, we have a zillion images and television, media, so the corporation, we have some concept of what the CEO failure notes are like. Okay, and when have you ever seen an evil regulator? Have you ever can you name a fictional portrait? Can you name a CEO?
Yes, a lot. But that's so interesting. I'm searching for differences here. You're right. Right. I mean, there is portrayals, especially of authoritarian regimes of the Soviet Union, where there's bureaucracy, Chernobyl. You can kind of see within that there's the story of the regulator. But yeah, it's not as plentiful. It also doesn't have face to it. Yes, bureaucracy is more of this thing that results anyone individually is either just obeying somebody else. There's not a face. The evil is the entire regime.
That's right. That's what I call the schoolfish strategy. point where you are an individual and you can be singled out, but there's more accountability for one person's bad tweets than all the worst of these, right? Because school of fish, right? So if the establishment is wrong, if the bureaucracy is wrong, we're all wrong at the same time. Who could have known? Whereas if you deviate, then you are a deviation of being hammered down. Okay. Now the school of fish strategy is unfortunately very successful because truth is whatever. If you just always ride the school of fish and turn and so on, unless there's a bigger school of fish that comes in, you basically can never be proven wrong, right? And this is actually, of course, as someone who believes in truth, believes in, innovation and so on, just basically logically can't ride the school of fish. You just have to say what's true, right? Still, you've described correctly, how it's facing, right? So I will give two examples of fictional portrayals. One is actually the original Ghostbusters.
Is that example? Yes.
Yes, EPA is that villain where they flip a switch that lets out all the ghosts in the city. And essentially the guy is coming in with a head of steam, this evil regulator that just totally arrogant, doesn't actually understand the private sector or the consequences of their actions. And they force and crucially they bring a cop with them with a gun. So it shows that a regulator is not simply, some insecure, but it is the police, right? And the cop with a gun forces the Ghostbusters to the second example is Dallas Fires Club, which is more recent. And that actually shows the FDA blocking a guy with a life-threatening illness, with aims from getting drugs to treat his condition and from getting it to other people, right? Those are just two portrayals, but in general, what you find is when you talk about FDA with people, one thing I'll often hear from folks is like, why would they do that? Right? They have no mental model of it. They kind of think of it as, why would this thing which was sort of the DMV, they don't think of the DMV as like this active thing, okay? Why would the FDA do that? Well, it is because it's filled with some ambitious people that want to keep increasing the power of nations, just like the CO1 series, the profit of the company, right? I use that word ambitious, right? Why ambitious? Because these folks are, we know the term greedy, right? These folks are power hungry. They want to have the maximum stuff. And sometimes regulatory systems like right? Even though FDA is under HHS, sometimes it collides with HHS. They've got regulations that conflict. For example, HHS has everybody's understanding access to the record. FDA didn't want people to have access to their personal genomes. That conflicts, okay? And both of those are kind of anti-corporate statutes that were put out. HHS can be targeted with the hospitals and FDA can target patient genomes. But those conflict, right? It's a little bit like CFTC and SEC have a door jam regulate for currency. Right? Sometimes regulators fight each other, but they fight each other. They fight companies. They're active players. This reputation of power book, the reason I mention it is
Reputation, power, organizational image, and pharmaceutical regulation.
so. Genentech's executive chief Rob, right? Rob would describe regulatory approval for his products as a fundamental challenge facing his company, and he would depict the administration in a particularly vivid metaphor. I've told the story hundreds of times to help people understand the FDA. When I was in Brazil, I worked on the Amazon River selling terramycin fertilizer. I hadn't seen my family for 8 or 9 months. We were flying into Sao Paulo, and I was flying down from a little village in the Amazon to Sao Paulo. I was a young guy in his 20s. I couldn't wait to see the kids. One that was a year-old baby, the other was 3. I missed my wife. There was a Quonset hut in front of just a little church staircase. So I roll up. There's a military refuge happen. So the soldier is standing there with his machine gun, and he said, "Can't come in." I was speaking pretty good Portuguese by that time. I said, "My God, my family, I gotta come in." He said again, "Can't." He took his seat off. He said, "Can't come in." I said, "Oh, now I got it. I can't go in there." And that's the way I always describe the FDA. The FDA is standing there with a machine gun against pharmaceutical industries. You better be their friend rather than they are the boss. If you're a pharmaceutical firm, they own your body and soul. Okay, that's the CEO of a successful company, Genentech. He said he's told the story hundreds of times. And regulatory approval is a fundamental challenge because if you are regulated by FDA, they are your primary customer. If they cut the cord on you, you have no other customers. scandal in China. I'm not saying this is that's why people are like making stuff is fine. All the examples, right? That's why I mentioned the template. You know, if Star Wars doesn't exist, how many times have you Star Wars?
Yeah, well, the five, the phone through a company that's not on a powerful because reputation, they go, whether you go to social media, they have horrible reputation. Like that.
Yes. Why is that? Because you take out FDA, keep down reputation of them, just like FDA, keep down will companies. And it does appear, right? In practice, dealing with the fact that we have fundamentally changed corporate structure and culture and have it in it and Rob said culture of acquiesce towards companies, as was done in other places. Rob essentially fired officials and habits who were insufficiently compliant with the FDA. What that means is de facto regulation. Just a whole that's a really big deal. Because if they're primary customer, then it has nationalized right? This is partially what's just happened with Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, the other MAGA. Okay, they have been that's right.
Yeah. I mean, even think of that.
Right? So it's like I always do something. MAGA Republican, MAGA Democrat. Okay.
So many things you've said today will just get stuck in my head. Huh? It changes the thing. Catchy. Something about catchy phrasing yes, makes me more calm. So yeah, okay. So that's happening in tech.
It's happening in tech. So Facebook is the outlier because Zuck still controls the company. But just like, I mean, why had tech had a good reputation for a while? Because there wasn't a regulatory agency whose justification was regulating these criminals. Right? Once that is the case, the regulatory agency basically comes back to Congress each year. If you look at its budget report saying, we find this many guys, we found this many violations, right? They have an incentive to exaggerate the threat. In the same way that a prosecutor or policeman has quota, right? Like these are the police. One way to describe it also is like um, like a step down transformer, high voltage electricity generated at the power plant. It comes over, there's step down transformers that turn it into low voltage that you can deal with out of your appliances. Right? Similarly, you have something where the high voltage of like the U.S. military, and that is transmitted down into a little letter that comes from us saying, pay your $50 parking ticket. Where it's a piece of paper, so you don't see the gun attached to it. But if you were to buy that, it's like Grand Theft Auto, where you get 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars, and eventually, you have some serious stuff. Okay. So once you understand that, every law is backed by force, like that Brazilian guy with the machine gun that Rob mentioned, these guys are the right attorneys. Now, see, for a time, what happened was you had captured because all of the folks in pharmaceuticals, as Carpenter said, it was their primary customer. So just like in a sense it's rational, Amazon talks about being customer obsessed, right? What Rob did was rational for that time, right? What Rob did was saying our customer is the FDA. That's our primary customer. Nobody else matters. They are satisfied first. Every single trade-off that has to be made is FDA, right? And really that's why the two most important departments of many pharmaceutical companies, arguably all, are affairs and IP, not R&D, right? Because one is artificial scarcity regulation, which jacks up the price, and the other is artificial scarcity patent, which allows people to maintain the high price, right? So this entire thing is just like college education. These things may at some point have been a good concept, but the price has just risen and risen and risen until it's at the limit price and beyond. Okay, so what has changed? What's changed is in the 2010s, late 2000s and 2010s and so on, with the advent of social media, with the advent of a bunch of millionaires, independent, with the advent of B, right, with the advent of cryptocurrency, with the diminution of trust in institutions, it used to be really taboo to talk about the FDA's potentially bad in like 2010, 2009, okay? But now people have just seen baseline after entire biomedical regulatory establishment saying masks don't work, what they do. This was just a train crash of all the things that you're paying for that you're supposed to good. As I mentioned, one response is to go QAnon, and people will say, "Oh, don't trust anything." Better response is decentralized. So I will say one other thing, which is I mentioned this concept of proving Form 3500, where you like scan. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. That just makes me laugh. I could just tell the form sucks, but the fact that it has my code name.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
You are spoken better.
Yeah. So they have a bad calculation. When we could make a better one, just modern device. The key insight here about the vectors, the non-obvious point, and I've got a whole talk on this actually that I should probably release. I actually did my home manuscript. It's called Regulation is Information. Product quality is a digital signal. Okay, what do I mean? Basically, when I talk about exit the Fed, that's the crypto economy, right? What does exit the FT look like? Well, one key insight is that many of the big scale tech companies can be thought of as cloud regulators rather than land regulators. What do I mean by that? First, what is regulation? People do want regulated marketplace. They want A, quality ratings, like on a 1 to 5 star, and B, bans bad actors, like the zero-star frauds and scammers. Distinct, right? Somebody who's like a low-quality, well-intentioned person is different than a smart person. Two different types of marketplace. Why is it rational for people to want to regulate a marketplace? Because they want to be one entry point, and then you don't have to evaluate everything when they have, right? You don't want to go to Starbucks and get lipstick every coffee to see if it's poison or something like that. You sort of want an entry point where you know things are basically good, and you know, digital and the regular and if we can regular cost, substitution. Right? The thing is, the model we've talked about is the land, the nation's territory thing. Collaborate with the public. That is, and I'm sorry, that's Yelp, that is eBay, that is Airbnb, that's Uber, and so on and so forth. It's also actually Gmail and Google. Why? Because you're expanding those rankings. And you are doing ranking across the entire inbox. Right? The Google itself, they ban malware links. Right? So bad actors are out and they're ranking them. So how about Apple? Apps, right? They ban bad actors and start ratings. So you start actually playing this lens PayPal. We've got a reputation. Every single web service that's at the scale of like tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people has had to build a cloud regulator. And the crucial thing is it scales across borders. So you can use the data from Mexico to help somebody in Moldova or vice versa. Right? Because right? Those ratings have an and there's other aspects of it, which is there are better regulators than land regulators. For example, Uber is a better regulator than tax penalties. Why? Everybody best practice. There's ratings on the driver and passenger side. Both parties will know that they can't record from the standard policy, right? If you have the lowest star rating website, you get the 5 and so much tax provider or driver, and all of that, right? What does that do? People have a fair bit of tax driver and inspection. You have reports from every single rider. Okay. Before Uber, it was taxi drivers and taxi monopoly. Okay. If they were persistent actors, taxi riders and not being held to do so New York's got to get that taxi. Okay. Nobody can take it. So the persistent actors, and they have this close kind of thing in medallion that just kept going up. Sort of collaboration with artificial. Afterwards, with Uber and Lyft metrics, it's a different kind of regulator. If you feel regulatory exists, and you mentioned Uber is the regulator, and Uber drivers, Lyft is the competing regulator. Drivers. Okay. You have a regulator versus another regulator. You no longer have you have the parties at the market. This is the concept like polycentric law, right, where you have multiple different legal regimes, same jurisdiction overlapping that you can choose to have. Right? All concepts. every state in Colorado try to make them unprotected. For example, they don't allow people in some states to identify themselves as they are. There's various other kinds of rules and regulations that Austin will allow you to ban, right? Yet though, like Uber, Grab, Gojek, Lyft, like the ride sharing concept is now common. Or the next version is with self-driving. Like, well, it's like a very hard thought model. This is a fundamentally better way of doing regulation process. Similarly, Airbnb for hotels. Basically the same thing. And Airbnb competition, I think that it's good to have like competition and there are other kinds of sites. But the moment it becomes operating in the once you realize regulation is information, the way you set up the competitors, FDA or SEC or FAA, something like that, is you just need better reviews. You start with that. That's your information for other reasons. That's like still the most dependent on the really structure. And not just one person. It turns out that FDA typically will use expert panels. They will panels like professors from the big so that is kind of a reputation. What you want to do is you want to have folks entrepreneurs or their props like Sinclair. You do want to have reviews. Okay. You also want to have special events. You want to have to use experts. So defected from current scout. Okay, just like cross defected from your son Larry. Or they weren't crossed with rats. Right? The same way you'll have defectors. Have the credentials, but can build up. Just like there's folks with Wall Street who have come in here and seen how legit things are. Just like the folks from Salzburg and the Substack. Okay, we have these folks by defecting they help, and we're also something already telling them like that competition is how you build the system by itself, or is it trying to avoid some fusion? Okay? So it's good system. You have like the most powerful MDs. You have the most powerful investors, and you have founders of actual products, and they are giving open source reviews of these products, and they're also building a community that will say, we want this drug, we want this, or we want this new device, and we're willing to collect 10,000 units. So please give us the thing and write a very fair review of it, and also all validate this. So you turn these people from just passive agents that's art, they've done kind of fundamental technical kind of type something like this, something like Vita down. It's very interesting. Technology down. We'll start with things like longevity. Right? And why is that? Because the entire model of FDA, this 26 model, is wait for somebody to have a disease and then try to cure it. Okay? Versus, say non-conventional growth cure. Right? Why are we not actually tracking folks and getting them tons of dashboard yourself so you can see what things are doing? And then you do just like you've got server authentic. You don't wait necessarily for the site to go down. You start seeing, response rates are spiking, we need to add more servers, right? You have some warning. Even 10 years ago, there was this article called Measured Man in the Atlantic, where this guy, who's Larry Small, what he was doing is he was essentially measuring himself. He was finding that there were pictures with information that was spiking. Eventually, doctors showed the charts. The doctor's like, I can't do this. Then that turned out to be a warning of like a serious condition. He had to surgery or something. And start thinking, well, look, the way that we're doing medicine right now, it's not quite like pre-germ disease, but it is pre-continuous diagnosis. Okay, pre-continuous diagnostics. Just talk about this is I mentioned one angle on which you go after like the better case, right? I mentioned the concept of better reviews. Yeah, okay. I mentioned write it down, which is like a review that is going to happen. Let's talk about so basically we know that on Bangalore, best way, but few million people probably not this way. Okay. And that's starting to change with all the complex supplements, the hundreds of millions of Apple Watches and Fitbits and stuff, right? You're also starting to see this very important. Which I read out to people are saying, wow, this is spiking rates. I'm going this is spiking my blood sugar. And it might be something very certain people. Some people, this is actually quite bad for them. What happens if you extend? Well, about 10 years ago, a guy, Mike Snyder, professor at Stanford, where he just took all the diagnostic himself over a period of 2 months of examination. So he had experiments doing that for people like got a cold or something, and he could see in the expression data that he was getting sick before he got sick. We could also see that something about that viral infection like that made him develop diabetes like symptoms, remembering. No, wait a second. The things that that I can see in my readouts that I only have the easiest interpretation of as like a technique, right? And moreover, you can see, I don't think this, but if you took treatments, took drugs, right? Show what your it was, show what your disease is, and then push back into non-disease state. Actually, that quantity out what like the state was, right? So that and that state, expression levels across all small molecules, basically everything you measure, that's going to vary from person to person. Right? With healthy natural food, maybe a different baseline. For example, small or South Asian who have dark skin tend to have vitamin D deficiency. Why? Because we eat a lot of sunlight. So often it's actually tapping into the screen. So or you could take like actually significant vitamin D. Okay. That's a small example of our baseline. Okay. So continuous diagnostics. What could that mean? That could mean on myself, like blood testing, right? So you have a providers. This is something which providers take care of, right? Come to the office, come to the office. This is a great business role. I think revisit this in 2022. Give people practice using multiple wellness comes every month. Take blood, runs every test, right? Maybe that's a few $1,000s a year, maybe eventually get $2,000 a year. And that's expensive in some cases. But boy, that's very helpful.
Yeah, but then the one, there's those companies that do this that actually, one of them is what we call inside track of process podcast. They do this. The reason I really appreciate them, the first ones that use how easy it is, but it's also depressing how little information exactly. Once again, how little information we have about our body.
Yes.
And actually, also sadly, inside track there, what that we have how to make
Right.
if I wanted to operate, I would like, I get just like I would like maybe I can't do it at first, why that application is useful, but there could be incredible, like that where builds is like what can I do that steps that you do myself.
That's right. So, I mean, one of the things about because there are so many movies made about fairness, okay, that's one of the reasons why certain people get off from doing diagnostics to some extent. Okay? Why? Because they do like like the diligence and everything, everyone's looking at blood tests, one drop of blood, hundreds recruiting essentially. A lot of the media and stuff around that basically has apologized. I think that we want to have a lot more entrance. Right? Now, one way of thinking about it is FDA is still way more people there. Right? Way more. Just take drug lag alone. Okay? Whenever you have a drug that works and reduces morbidity and mortality after it's actually been it was delayed for months and years. The influence of that curve is excess morbidity and mortality attributable to that drug lag. You can go back and do that study across lots and lots of different drugs. You probably find quite a lot. Now it's counteracted numbers have been right? That's just like one example. gave the pandemic example. In fact, they held up debates for the test and didn't do challenge costs. That's like, they're not, that's like a million Americans that could have been less if you had gotten the vaccine out to the vulnerable population. Okay? So you're talking about something that has a total monopoly for health, and you can't know what is out that unless you have zones that are free, but that have some form of regulation. As I mentioned, it's not going back to zero regulation, everybody in there itself, but it's a more reputable regulator, just like if Google is a better regulator than the taxi giants.
Yeah, I mean, you're waiting to take the which
there are a bunch of people who tweeted something like that. Whatever.
Is that possible? Like, if you were could you push for those kinds of changes, or is that?
Short answer, and the longer answer would be
Well, everybody, like, short answer is no.
so basically, the CEO of a company is very difficult. They can't hire and fire, right? So in theory, they could do surgery on the organism. And like Steve Jobs took over Apple, and he was able to hire and fire, raise money, that he basically had roots over Apple. Like he was an assistant administrator, right? He had full commissions. Okay? As FDA commissioner, you do not have full commissions over FDA, let alone like the whole structure around it, right? If you're an FDA commissioner, you are not CEO. Okay? A lot of folks there have careers. They can't be fired. They can't even this something called the Douglas factors. You heard of the Douglas factors? It's like the Miranda rights for federal. Okay, so basically, you've heard that federal employees can't be fired. Douglas factors are how the operation works. When you try to fire someone, it's a whole process where they get appeal it, and they're sitting in the office while you're trying to fire them, and they're complaining that this guy's trying to fire me, bad guy. And everybody around, even if they may think that guy's bad guy, but wait a second, fire you, I try. And so anybody who tries to